formally signed. The Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, has called off his threat to boycott the summit, saying Britain has given him the guarantees over the future of Gibraltar that he wanted. Well, the European Council President Donald Tusk announced in a tweet that the EU would give its backing to the deal at the summit tomorrow. He wrote, "I will recommend that we approve on Sunday the outcome of Brexit negotiations. No one has reasons to be happy, but at least at this crucial time, excuse me, the EU 27 has passed the test of unity and solidarity." Well, let's go live to Brussels and our reporter Gavin Lee. Gavin, it looks like it's all going ahead. We've just been hearing from Arlene Foster at the DUP. I'd just like to put to you very quickly, if this doesn't get through the British Parliament, have you heard talkings, murmurings on the European side already discussing what would be put in place?
Yeah, I mean, the really interesting point is, and I think this is going back to the point that they've been proud on this side of the water, is the unity of the EU. Every time I speak to Spanish, Belgian or even Portuguese diplomats, they will say the same thing, which is we've got to see how this rolls in the UK. You remember just a few weeks ago we had Donald Tusk, the head of the European Council, alluding to the fact that there could be a no Brexit, but that's really in hushed tones. I think the sense is that if it doesn't go through Parliament, that could be that Theresa May and the government try to regather, try to work a way to go through, because at the moment they are listening to the leader, they're listening to Theresa May, who is saying that, you know, she is pushing through that policy. That is the plan, and it's also got to go through the European Parliament as well and be ratified by 750 MEPs. So there's, you know, still steps in the process, but this is clearly the first big marker. I think Le Soir newspaper here in Belgium called it today the final curtain of Act 1 of Brexit, and the stage is set now, because Spain and Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, after days where we thought that they were not going to appear at the summit, they weren't happy, they wanted more say with bilateral talks for the future of Gibraltar with the UK. Now, just a few hours ago, Pedro Sanchez saying to reporters that there has been an agreement. This is what he had to say.
I've just told the King that Spain has reached an agreement on Gibraltar. The first thing I want to say is that consequently the European Council will take place tomorrow, and the second is that Europe and the UK have accepted the conditions set down by Spain. Because of this, Spain will lift its veto and will vote tomorrow in favour of Brexit.
Now, language is important here. Pedro Sanchez talking about, you know, what he has achieved, the British government, well, what they did today. Tim Robbins, basically gave a sense of his position in a letter on behalf of the British government, the representative to the EU from Theresa May, saying that there's a particular article that Spain weren't happy with, Article 184, and they are making clear, it's a fairly anodyne article according to the EU, talking about the future relationship between the EU and the UK, making efforts to have a good trade deal, and the Spanish saying that they wanted to mention that Gibraltar wasn't part of that. Well, the Brits have done that, and from their side, to Tim Barrow, the ambassador, effectively saying that, you know, Gibraltar isn't part. We will discuss this separately. What will happen now? Theresa May will go to the building behind me, the European Commission, meeting in the next half an hour with Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the Commission. And what will happen? They will talk about the choreography of tomorrow, this special summit. And then she will walk across the road, she will go to the European Council building and meet with the head, Donald Tusk, in this building, and this is where the summit will take place, behind what they call the Space Egg building, given what it looks like, of course, and all the glass on the outside built by each member state, taken from each and every of the 28 countries, soon to be 27 if Theresa May steers that course. So she'll be arriving here soon. The mood, we're told, about tomorrow won't be celebratory, no champagne corks popping. It'll be sombre on both sides, reflecting the fact that Britain is attempting to leave after 45 years, and that's the course Theresa May is currently steering through, and they're trying to reflect and respect one another in the process. So no family photo, no photos, no set-up pictures tomorrow. It'll be a press conference straight after, perhaps with Theresa May. We'll hear from her tonight as well.
Gavin Lee in Brussels, thank you. Well, in the past hour, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Arlene Foster, has addressed her party's conference in Belfast to loud applause. Ms Foster told supporters that the draft withdrawal agreement failed the Prime Minister's own key commitments.
Now, Conference, I do want to acknowledge the hard work and determined efforts of the Prime Minister to secure an agreement. I believe she is genuine when she says she wants to see an outcome that does no harm to the Union and the internal market of the United Kingdom. However, this draft agreement fails her own key commitments. The Prime Minister has not been able to guarantee an outcome that eliminates the risk of the introduction of the so-called backstop arrangements. Now, on the one hand, we're told that the backstop would be the best of both worlds. And on the other hand, we're told we're not going to need the backstop. So, ladies and gentlemen, therein lies one of the many contradictions at the heart of this draft withdrawal agreement. In such circumstances, Northern Ireland alone would be aligned to numerous EU single market regulations, while Great Britain would not. Such a scenario, in the medium term, would inevitably lead to barriers to trade within the United Kingdom internal market. Let me be very clear. That is not in the national interest.
Arlene Foster there. Well, our Ireland correspondent Chris Page is at the conference in Belfast for us. Chris.
Yes, Arlene Foster, with the message that the DUP is reaffirming its opposition to the Prime Minister's draft Brexit deal. There's never been as much attention on the Democratic Unionist Party. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, here last night. Boris Johnson was speaking before Arlene Foster earlier this afternoon. And after all, this is the party whose 10 MPs sustain Theresa May's minority government. There at the parliamentary pivot point. And with one of those MPs now, Gavin Robinson, who's the MP for East Belfast. Gavin Robinson, what did you make of what Arlene Foster had to say this afternoon about the Brexit situation in particular?
I think Arlene's been very clear in our position, and our position has been an honourable one held for 18 months, 2 years, where we have indicated that we have constitutional red lines, that we want to see this country, which voted to leave as one, leave as one, and do so in a way which doesn't impinge on the constitutional economic integrity of our country. So that message was reaffirmed today, and indeed endorsed by Conservative colleagues.
So there's no turning back on this. You will vote against the deal if it comes before Parliament in its present form. What happens after that?
I think what has been useful over the last number of days, and this is a continually moving feast, is that there has been a coalescence of an understanding that the backstop is not in our best interest, the United Kingdom's best interest. Indeed, Philip Hammond was of that view last night. I think it's heartening to see that even in the event of this deal being rejected, the Irish government have said very clearly they would not impose a hard border on the island of Ireland. So that being the case, what's all the fuss about? And after 2 years of suggesting that there could be technological solutions to the issues around the border, which were dismissed and scoffed at, the European Commission are now saying actually they could work. So there is an understanding now that there are solutions available. We just need to see that what was presented in the political document on Thursday could be translated into the legal text.
Well, the Prime Minister says if this deal isn't backed by Parliament, well, what is the alternative? We could be looking at a no deal, we could be looking at no Brexit, and of course the DUP have passionately been in favour of Brexit right from the start. So would those two consequences be a bit of a problem for you, to say the least, if voting against this deal brought either of them about?
Parliament has passed through legislation our intention to leave the European Union. That's going to happen on the 29th of March. We are now wasting time asking Parliament to consider a deal which we know will not pass through the House of Commons. It doesn't have support with Labour, SNP, ourselves, Plaid Cymru, Liberal Democrats and almost 80 Conservative members of Parliament. It doesn't have their support. It's not going to pass. What we should be doing is recalibrating that deal and taking what was issued in the political accord on Thursday into the legally binding text of the withdrawal agreement. That's where the focus should lie. If we need to wait for 3 weeks until it's rejected by Parliament, then so be it. But that's the job of work that now needs to commence.
Gavin Robinson, DUP MP, thanks very much indeed for talking to us here on BBC News. So you heard Gavin Robinson there backing up what his party leader Arlene Foster had to say in the main conference hall within the last hour. She says this deal is not the Brexit deal that the DUP wants, and that the Prime Minister should go back and renegotiate it. And you can be sure of one thing: the DUP will try to maximise its influence in Parliament over the coming weeks, no matter what happens.
Chris Page, thank you very much. Well, police in Paris have used tear gas and water cannon to disperse protesters demonstrating for a second week against a planned rise in fuel tax. Clashes broke out on the Champs-Élysées despite a police security cordon around key sites. Over the past year, the price of diesel has risen by around 23%. Lisa Hamperley reports.
A sea of yellow, the protesters in their trademark high-vis jackets on the Champs-Élysées. The authorities mean business too, using water cannon and tear gas against the thousands of protesters, trying to prevent them moving down to the Palais de la Concorde and the presidential palace, which has been cordoned off. Organisers bill this as Act 2 in their rolling campaign. They're angry about an increase in diesel tax, justified by the government as an anti-pollution levy. But the campaign has grown into a broad opposition against President Emmanuel Macron. This metalworker says, "We feel like we've been working for years now, and it's just extortion, while members of the government live like princes. It's not even possible to live anymore after paying taxes," says this woman. "I'm disgusted. I'm telling you, if I saw him, I wouldn't be able to shake his hand, and I'd tell him exactly what I think." Some here have been ripping up the street and trying to build barricades. But as protesters let off fireworks, the authorities have the power to move them on. Close to 300,000 people protested across France last week. It's estimated that by the end of today, 30,000 will have taken to the streets here in Paris. Lisa Hamperley, BBC News.
The headlines now on BBC News. Theresa May heads to Brussels as the EU says it's ready to sign the Brexit withdrawal agreement. French police use water cannon and tear gas against demonstrators in Paris who are demanding a cut in fuel prices. A US government report warns that unchecked climate change will cost the country hundreds of billions of dollars and damage human health and quality of life.
And in sport, it's the final day of the Rugby Union Autumn Internationals. Scotland are beating Argentina 14-6 at Murrayfield. England were drawing against Australia at half-time at Twickenham, but Elliot Daly has just given the lead. 2013, the latest there. England's cricketers have a 99-run lead against Sri Lanka in the final test. Adil Rashid took 5 wickets in Colombo on the second day as the hosts collapsed to 240 all out. And Formula 1 champion Lewis Hamilton is on pole for the final race of the season, tomorrow's Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. A quick update from the Premier League. They're into the second half. Manchester City, the leaders, are beating West Ham 3-0. Fulham and Southampton drawing 2-2. Brighton are beating Leicester. We're going to have a full update for you about 5:30.
The English director Nicholas Roeg has died, aged 90. His best-known films include Don't Look Now and The Man Who Fell to Earth, which starred David Bowie. Nick Hyam looks back on his life.
I sent your food back to get it warm.
Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland in Nick Roeg's masterpiece, Don't Look Now.
Stand up. Okay.
It was sumptuous and eerie. As in all his films, the images by turns hook you, hypnotise you, unsettle you. He was a cameraman before he was a director. Here he is on the set of Fahrenheit 451, filming Julie Christie for the French director Francois Truffaut. He was director of photography on Dr. Zhivago, but fell out with the director David Lean, who sacked him. His replacement won an Oscar for work that was partly Roeg's. This adaptation of Far From the Madding Crowd was all his own work, though, and also won awards.
Why don't you go to a hotel?
His first film as director was Performance, starring Mick Jagger as a rock star and James Fox as a gangster.
I remember you in Hemlock Road, 1956.
It included graphic scenes of violence, sex and drug-taking.
Strong, your arm is working perfectly, but there's a part that's not screwed on.
We want to drink. I can't make it any simpler. Water.
He followed it with Walkabout, about 2 white children lost in the Australian desert.
Has warned that climate change will cost America hundreds of billions of dollars and damage human health if no action is taken. President Trump has repeatedly cast doubt on the reality of climate change. Our correspondent James Cook has more.
This, say many scientists, is what climate change looks like. In recent years, California has seen bigger, deadlier and more destructive wildfires than ever before. During a cold snap in Washington this week, President Trump tweeted, "Whatever happened to global warming?" Now his own government experts have answered the question. It's here, they say. Its effects are serious, and without dramatic change, they will be catastrophic. Already, says the report, more frequent and intense storms like Hurricane Harvey, which ravaged Houston in Texas, are destroying property and may damage critical infrastructure such as bridges, power plants and oil refineries. Crop yields and labour productivity will decline. There will be a rise in the spread of tropical disease. The poorest Americans will be hardest hit.
One of the things that's quite striking about the report, for example, is that we could see a future where the southeastern parts of the United States experience forest fire seasons that look like what happens in the West right now.
The scientists say substantial and sustained reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions are essential, and they do report some progress. Without major urgent action, says the report, the impacts of climate change will soon cascade into every corner of American life. James Cook, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, I'm joined now via webcam by Professor Sam Frankhauser, Director of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change at the London School of Economics. Thank you for joining us here on BBC News. Just very quickly, did the report that you put together, or that has been put together, throw up any as yet undocumented results?
No, I think it was a very careful report that took several years to put together. It was produced by a very competent team of experts. It was very carefully peer-reviewed. So the quality of the evidence that has been assembled is really very good, as good as it can be at this point.
OK, so you have the evidence there. But how are we doing in terms of adapting, excuse me, or the US doing in terms of adapting to climate change?
Well, it's important that we start focusing a little bit more on adapting to climate change. The focus has long been on reducing emissions, and that's crucial. That's really the first order issue that we have. But we can't forget that a certain amount of climate change is already in the pipeline, and we'll have to adapt to that. We are beginning to get better at that, but we are really only at the start of a process that will be with us for a very, very long time, because climate change will be with us for a very, very long time.
You know, one of the conclusions from the report is that it's going to cost America a lot of money. I mean, you can apply this to many countries, couldn't you? Not just America. Financial incentives, are they enough to get people's attention, do you think?
We need quite a broad range of measures. Financial incentives are absolutely crucial. We also need a government regulation that is climate aware and incentivizes people to do the right thing. Planning, regulation on where we build our houses, how we build our houses, where we build our infrastructure, how we build our infrastructure. All these things are crucial because houses, infrastructure, ports, those are long-lived pieces of capital, long-lived capital that will still be there when the climate has changed.
Well, Professor, how do you think you can get the attention of people who are responsible for building houses, like you said, for putting infrastructure in the correct place that will adapt to future climate change? How do you get them to listen to you and act on that?
Well, the good news is the level of awareness is increasing across society, including amongst people who invest in infrastructure and in buildings. But it does need government regulation, zone planning, building codes, incentives to build houses to zero carbon standards, but also to climate resilience standards. That's a role for government, and government has to do more on that than we currently see.
You know, a lot of the change can come from the micro level, from a country's citizens. For example, being aware of carbon usage. We've heard all about the carbon footprint, which is fine. But if you have the government who have a very opposing stance. Let's take the example of Donald Trump. What hope is there that citizens will get behind taking the appropriate action to combat climate change?
Well, with all due respect to the American president, I think citizens are much more enlightened at the moment about the risks of climate change, and they are understanding what they have to do. They need more sort of incentives, more guidance to do it. But issues like the uptake of electric cars, the uptake of renewable energy, these are trends that are happening on the climate resilience side, on the need to adapt. We see more measures taken on protecting properties, not nearly enough, but we see those measures starting to happen. As a funny anecdote, even Donald Trump's company is protecting their golf courses against sea level rise, so the message is getting through.
OK, Professor Sam Frankhauser, fascinating speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News. Now, hundreds of environmental activists have taken part in a demonstration in Parliament Square in Westminster. As part of the event, organised by the group Extinction Rebellion, protesters were urged to wear funeral clothing and bring wreaths along to symbolise what campaigners see as the threat to the planet's future. Demonstrations are also taking place at the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh, as well as in Manchester, North Wales and Sheffield. Now, the destruction of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil has reached its highest level in a decade, driven mainly by illegal logging and the planting of crops. Satellite images show that 3,000 square miles of forest was cleared in the year to July, which is up nearly 14% on the previous year. Environmentalists say deforestation is one of the main causes of global warming. The National Crime Agency has issued a warning to organised gangs, which it says are behind a recent spike in illegal attempts to cross the English Channel. Earlier today, the French authorities picked up 5 migrants from a small boat just off the coast southwest of Calais. On Friday, 8 Iranians were brought ashore after their dinghy was spotted off the coast of Kent. Well, it brings the total number of suspected migrants to have reached the UK this month to 101. So let's talk now via webcam to the MP for Dover, Charlie Elphick. Charlie, just first off, what do you make about this spike in numbers?
Well, we've seen small craft seeking to break into Britain before in this sort of way, but never on this scale. We've seen over 100 people try to get into Britain, landing on beaches in Zodiacs and indeed hijacked fishing trawlers. And it underlines the importance of taking action, because as winter sets in, the seas are getting rougher, the temperatures are getting colder, and this is incredibly dangerous.
What do you think is behind this spike then? Why are people taking this risk despite the dangers?
Well, it's clear that there's an organised trafficking network which is behind this, and that's why I've been calling on the Home Office and the French authorities to work together to put a stop to it, to stop this organisation in its tracks before there is a tragedy in the middle of the English Channel. And that's why I particularly welcome the fact that the French do, at long last, seem to have been taking now some positive action.
Charlie, back in, I think it was January, there was the border treaty that was signed between France and the UK. What sort of trend have you seen since then? It was criticised for actually encouraging more migrants to head towards Calais.
Well, I think the really important thing is that the amount of illegal migration between Dover and Calais has been falling dramatically. People used to clamber into the backs of lorries and they used to go to the jungle in Calais as a jumping off point. We managed to get the jungle dismantled after a very long campaign. The number of illegal entrants through by the backs of lorries has been dramatically reduced. But that has had a certain displacement effect, as we've been seeing, with people trying sort of more remote ports, inlets, beaches and airfields. And that, I think, is where we need to focus.
OK, Charlie, there are several elements there that we have to consider. It's been highlighted as organised crime. Now, with that, you need a very organised crime fighting system in place. And when it comes to the UK and Europe, that includes Europol, for example, and the Schengen information system. How do you think Brexit is going to impact on that? Because in terms of gathering intel, you say that the Home Office should be doing more, but if they lose that resource, how do you think the UK government, the Home Office, can fight this worrying increase in people trying to cross the Channel?
Well, it's important to note that cooperation isn't just something that we do peculiarly with Europe. We are part of the best intelligence network in the world, the so-called Five Eyes combination. It includes the United States, Australia, and countries like that. So I think cooperation is about the mindset. It's not about being part of any particular organisation. It's also important to realise that there's a big difference in cooperation and control. We're leaving the control of the European Union, but that doesn't mean we can't continue to cooperate and work positively with European countries in the years to come.
OK, MP Charlie Elphicke, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, hundreds of people have attended the funeral of the well-known Syrian radio host and activist Riyad Fares, who was killed by gunmen in the rebel-held province of Idlib. Mr. Fares founded an independent radio station broadcasting from opposition-held areas. Despite several assassination attempts, he refused to leave Idlib and continued to defy both the government and militants. Now, when Fresh Radio was ordered to remove its female presenters, he used software to disguise their voices. Well, tributes to Fares have been paid from across the world. Dateline London is coming up. Before that, though, let's just catch up with the weather. Here's Nick.
Hello. Northwest Scotland fared best for sunshine today and will again tomorrow, thanks to an easterly flow coming into the UK. So most of the cloud stays in the east and south, and with it today we've had either outbreaks of rain or showers, and through this evening tonight we'll keep a few showers near the south coast of England, running to eastern Scotland and northeast England, maybe one or two to Northern Ireland later in the night. Temperatures getting into low single figures and close to freezing in the coldest, clearest spots, parts of northwest England, Northern Ireland and western Scotland, most favoured for maybe a touch of frost going into the morning. Tomorrow, still this easterly flow, still showers round through eastern and southern Scotland, northern England, pushing on the breeze in towards Northern Ireland, some clipping the far southeast parts of East Anglia into southeast England. Elsewhere, variable cloud, clear spells, quite a bit of dry weather away from the showers, and still the easterly breeze. Stronger wind in Scotland compared with today. I think overall tomorrow will feel a little bit cooler than it has done today. That's your latest forecast.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Dateline London, bringing together in debates leading UK commentators with foreign correspondents who file their stories with the Dateline London. On today's programme, Theresa May exercises her muscles in Brussels this weekend, but will the knockout blow to her Brexit deal be delivered at Westminster? Is a gulf opening up between the West and the Gulf states? And as the British Museum lends to Nigeria valuable stolen bronzes, is it time to hand back the loot of empire? With me, Janet Daly, columnist for the Sunday Telegraph, Nabila Ramadani, who reports widely on the Arab world, the US broadcaster Michael Goldfarb, host of the podcast The First Rough Draft of History, and the Belgian journalist Marc Roche of the weekly magazine Le Point. Now, a weekend in Brussels for Theresa May as she and the leaders of 27 other countries sign off on the UK's divorce from the European Union. Mrs May has been fending off last-minute objections, brinkmanship perhaps from countries like Spain and France, hoping for further British concessions, because only a majority of EU countries need to approve the deal. In all likelihood, the Brussels summit will end in smiles and handshakes. Back in London, though, the withdrawal terms face a much tougher audience. The former Brexit secretary and enthusiast for leaving thinks the terms are worse than staying in the European Union. With the support of the Democratic Unionists, a party from Northern Ireland, on paper the Prime Minister has a majority of the votes in the House of Commons. Just. But the DUP won't back the deal, and 80 of her own Conservative MPs have already said publicly the same. Well, if we were to go back to the European Union and say, people didn't like the deal, can we have another one? Mrs May says, I don't think they're going to come and say to us, all right then. Now, Marc Roche, is the deal can't get through at the Westminster Parliament? Isn't this summit a bit of a charade?
Well, the first thing is that, as Theresa May said, it's take it or leave it. this is the only deal to leave the European Union and at the same time keep a link with it. So the Brexiters are happy, they leave the European Union, and the Remainers somehow are happy also because for many years there will be a link through the customs union. Now, Britain has no choice. This is a good deal, it's a compromise deal. It's a deal that makes business people very happy, it gives continuity to business, and more than anything, it gives a future to Britain in Europe but outside the EU. So I think that people like Janet, who disagree about the deal, should forget about the illusion of grandeur, should forget about going on your own. You should think this is the deal and you should embrace it for the national interest of Britain.
I thought the only people who made you an offer you couldn't refuse were the mafia. I mean, this is a new political development on the world stage. There are absolutely sound reasons why people are saying it would be better to stay in, and some of them mean it because they're mischievous and they're actually Remainers and they wanted to stay in anyway. And other people are saying it quite sincerely because what they mean is that it is a basic principle of modern democracy that the legitimacy of the law derives from the consent of the people. And once you remove that principle, once you abrogate that principle, then you're doing something that should be morally repugnant in any free society. And therefore, they're saying, if we stay in without even a voice in making the laws and making the rules and making the regulations, and we accept, like a colony or a conquered nation, we accept rules that have been made by other countries, then we are losing the plot in terms of what a democratic nation state is.
You are a vassal because the European Union. And I am because I'm British now. But the European Union was united, the British were disunited. The European Union has all the advantages.
You're giving the ideal argument for us to leave. It couldn't be a better argument for us to leave.
It's been going on for 2 years. Now, can we just talk about what's happening?
And it may go on for another 2 years.
Right now. And the first time we talked about it, I said the grass was very long and that's where we would end up. But I'm not sure that that's going to happen now. I mean, one thing I would say, and I know Janet will appreciate this, is why are we going through this 2-week-long charade? She's going to have to write a couple of columns. And we all know that when she brings this withdrawal agreement to the Commons, the arithmetic as of today
doesn't work.
She is going down. Why is she going down?
That's why the other leaders have decided, we hear on Saturday, that there's going to be no photo call, there's going to be no actual handshake, because actually they don't want it printed 2 weeks later when the deal's demolished in Westminster.
But what I'd like to do is just talk about something we rarely talk about when we talk about it on this show, which is, look, majorities and majorities. 16 million people voted to remain. 17 million, roughly, voted to leave. Now, the 16 million have no party. Of the two major parties, they have no party that is arguing their case in Parliament.
Yes, they do. The Remainers don't have... Oh, no.
No, Janet, listen.
There are Remainers within both parties who are arguing strenuously and giving an enormous amount of broadcasting time to do it.
No, I'm saying... No, the Leader...
No, he's saying the opposite, which is...
No, I'm saying the Remainer... What is the Labour Party policy?
Oh, well, God knows.
That's what I mean. That's a complete mystery. This is what I'm saying. Can we talk about the specifics, Janet?
You mean the official party lines?
The official party lines.
Of course. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
So who represents what? And so now we're going to get to what seems to be inevitable. Just as Julius Caesar was offered the crown 3 times, yesterday Theresa May was offered the question, will you resign if you don't get it through Parliament? And she declined to answer. We are entering into this new phase over the next 90 days where if the parliamentary arithmetic is correct, and Janet will know because she talks to all these people, then she's not going to get the withdrawal agreement through. Then there's going to be a general election, and then what on earth will happen? And what will the EU 27 do?
There doesn't have to be a general election. There doesn't have to be a general election. There has to be, in theory, a leadership election, although the party could do the same thing and decide by acclamation to appoint a caretaker who will say explicitly, I will not stand at the next general election, but I will see us through this period. That would be the most sane, rational way to approach this.
When has the sane, rational happened in the last 2 years?
It's the only deal which is on the table.
Yeah, I think as a Mark was saying, Britain has effectively been renegotiating its relationship with Europe for centuries, but the myth...
Yeah. Sometimes with arms and sometimes with pens, yes.
But the myth that the UK can now throw the entire chessboard in the air and go it alone has been exposed. And I think the biggest problem facing Britain at the moment is the vast disconnect between ideology and practical reality. If you strip all the ideology out of Brexit, that is to say the nationalism, the flag waving, the sense of exceptionalism and, dare I say, entitlement, then you're left with mind-numbing practical problems that will potentially go on for decades if they can be resolved at all. And I think the Brexiteers are more excited by the idea of Brexit than the reality of it. And European politicians actually, slaving over a fiendishly complicated divorce bill this weekend sums up the problems. You have hugely sensitive issues such as Gibraltar and the Irish border, who are the kind who would, require huge amounts of time and energy, and yet they are being tossed into the big Brexit pot.
Hang on.
And that's the problem.
The Irish border problem was actually addressed, something that everybody noticed on Thursday morning and then has got lost in the shuffle. The Irish border problem now, miraculously, the EU has decided could be solved by technological means and trusted trader agreements. This is something they described 5 minutes ago as magical thinking.
So why do we need what is the backstop? Sorry, Michael.
Wait, just let me finish.
Very fudgy.
Just let me finish. It is absolutely
fudgy.
It is absolutely fudgy. That's absolutely right. And there's great heavy weather being made of the fact that the withdrawal agreement still talks about the backstop and puts it into law, although the backstop would be completely unnecessary if the Irish border question were, which has been a ridiculous fiction, which has been promoted to the world-stopping event that it has been. If that can be resolved, as everybody who knows about these things says that it can, with technology and trusted trader agreements, the backstop disappears. And the need for us to say in the customs union indefinitely disappears. Now, that is only in the political directive, it's true, which is not legally binding. The withdrawal agreement, this is tedious, I know, but the withdrawal agreement is legally binding, and that still talks about the backstop. So there's now an outright contradiction between the withdrawal agreement, hang on, which is legally binding.
No, but this is all,
it's all
the business people, listen to your business people, they say, is this deal
some business
Janet,
people.
Can I take you back to the question I asked Mark right at the beginning? It feels like a lifetime ago now. But is this summit a charade if this deal is going to be defeated anyway?
Sure, of course it is, but it's a charade. The EU is very big on charades. The whole bloody thing is a charade.
Well, the charade was in the UK, sorry. The EU was united, and the UK was the charade.
What is probably going to happen now is a managed no deal. We are going to get no deal, and we are going to come out, and it's going to be much, much less traumatic than everybody has been claiming that it would be. Within 6 months, everything will have settled down.
I'm writing that down on the inside of my palm. And in 6 months, I'm calling up Janet Daly.
People have to do business.
We will have you all back,
I
promise you. We will have you all back together at some point, maybe around 6 months, to see if that has come to pass. Now, the US President Donald Trump has concluded it doesn't matter whether or not Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince knew in advance about the plan to murder Jamal Khashoggi. The United States will remain a steadfast partner, he said, regardless. UK officials appeared a bit more embarrassed about their partnership. 200 of the UK military engaged in a joint exercise in Saudi Arabia this weekend. Not that all is well in UK Gulf relations. The British have courted displeasure with their efforts to sponsor a ceasefire in the war being waged in Yemen. On Wednesday, a court in the United Arab Emirates jailed for life a postgraduate student the UAE says is a spy. The British Foreign Secretary warned of serious diplomatic consequences. Nabila, there are signs as the weekend is upon us that the UAE is sending a different signal now about this case. It's possible that this young man could eventually be released, but there does seem to have been real shock at the sentence and a kind of disconnect between what the British were thinking would happen and what actually happened.
Well, this is a horrific story that has captured the imagination of the British audience and public for all the right reasons. And the UAE is currently considering clemency, and there are talks for a presidential pardon. Given the close relationship between the UAE and Britain, I think it's very likely to be granted. But I think that, this is also probably in response to the public outcry, which has been led by the media, of course. But the British government, British diplomats seem to have been taken by surprise by the sentence. And you would have thought that British diplomats would have looked more closely into this case, especially as it involved an alleged British agent being charged for spying.
Is something changing about the relationship between the West and the Gulf states? Because in the past they've been thought of as really close allies. The West not always keen to call out some of the things that are happening that it might normally not approve of in those countries broadly following a foreign policy line that the West approved of.
I think what all these kind of cases that you've highlighted actually show is the abject amorality of the West's, and including Britain's, relations with super-rich Gulf states. I mean, both parties to this cosy relationship pretend that they can sort problems together and that the petrodollar profits can keep flowing, whatever happens. The truth is that the Gulf states would do whatever they want as long as they remain one of the biggest markets for British arms, and they can assist the West in prosecuting devastating wars against Middle Eastern and North African countries. So due process or any kind of justice actually goes out of the window if countries such as the UAE and Saudi Arabia do what they have in mind. Meanwhile, I have to say, Britain pretends to impose civilized values when in fact the West's entire value system is based on multi-billion dollar profits and the maintenance of security on its own terms.
Michael, what do you make of, in particular, Donald Trump's remarks this week that we're going to remain steadfast partners? In a sense, it doesn't matter whether it's the Khashoggi killing or not, whether or not the Crown Prince knew about it.
It's interesting. I mean, there's one thing that you can say, I'm not sure I want to use the word positive about it, but I mean, the man does actually say, without any diplomatic havering about what the truth of the relationship is, which is very similar to what Nabila was just saying. Look, there has existed for decades, going back actually to, I mean, really half a century and more, a kind of perfect feedback loop. We give them money for oil in Saudi Arabia. They ship a considerable amount of that money back in the form of arms purchases. And the U.S. has never broken from that. And so when Trump says, oh, they're going to buy $150 billion worth of arms, no such order exists. I mean, the usual Trumpian, we'll say exaggeration. No, we won't. We'll say the usual Trumpian lies in tweets, and it doesn't matter because he's saying an essential fact, that when he says, well, if we don't trade with them, somebody else will. He doesn't mean Britain. He means Russia and China. Well, Russia won't trade with them because Russia trades with Iran, and that's going to get in a problem. But China will trade with anyone, and he's right, and he'll say that. So this props up the House of Saud, and they can continue to act as what they are, which is essentially an absolute feudal monarchy. And I mean, Saudi Arabia's economy is, in a sense, it is feudal. The money goes into the Al Saud and it gets distributed to other tribes and to other people, and this is what sustains the economy. So unfortunately, the harsh reality is that the Crown Prince can, it's alleged, and it seems likely, send a